and he's a design strategist, researcher, and artist. He's been involved, as has Quicksand, extensively in projects exploring and supporting the use of transmedia tools for participant and community engagement in clinical trials. Yes? Oh, I'm so sorry about this. Can you hear me now? Okay. So, apologies for this hitch when we are doing a digital session. So, let me start again. Welcome to the CDSA Wednesday webinar series. This is a session 2, which is digital tools for participant engagement. And it's part of the series on digital solutions for clinical trials in the pandemic era. I'm Usha Menon. I'm strategy lead at CDSA and professor at the MRC Clinical Trials Unit at University College London. At the Clinical Trials Unit, we have patient public involvement, or PPI as we call it in short, throughout the life cycle of the clinical trial. Patients are involved in every aspect from design through conduct to reporting. And what PPI acknowledges is that those people who have lived experiences of the disease or the condition that we are studying, our patients, they bring additional expertise to the table. They give us novel and valuable insights, which improve the quality of the trial. Today, we will focus at the front end of the clinical trial life cycle, so in setup and conduct. And our first talk will be from Mr. Avinash Kumar on digital tools for participant engagement. Mr. Kumar is a co-founder of Quicksand, and he's a design strategist, a researcher, and an artist. And he has been involved, as has Quicksand, extensively in projects supporting the use of transmedia tools and for participant and community engagement throughout the life cycle of the clinical trial. But one of the things that he is going to speak to us at some depth today is on tools that we can use to better inform our stakeholders, our participants about the trial. And we really do need to improve our patient information leaflets. And I have just done cut and paste from a website. You could watch this video on YouTube or go to the Oxford CTU website to see it. And you will hear Marie speak about the information leaflet, which was 5 pages long. And she spent 6-7 hours reading it, and she could not understand anything at the end of it. So Avinash will tell us how we can improve the situation. And then the next is a very topical issue in this time, e-consent. And Dr. Rajesh Jain will speak to it. Dr. Jain is a global clinical research and medical affairs professional with 25 years of experience in the pharmaceutical industry. He has a keen interest in exploring the interplay between digital technologies and clinical operations and how they can improve outcomes and bring efficiency. And he's also got a keen interest in patient-centric trials. For those of you who are interested in the literature, there has been just recently an online publication ahead of print of a review of e-consenting for conducting research remotely. This being a very new area, as you can imagine, though they looked at 600 plus studies, only 18 met the inclusion criteria. So if any of you want to read, it's an open access publication from King's College, and you should be able to access it on the web. Before I close, a couple of housekeeping rules as last time. One is that thank you for all the questions you have sent. They have been passed on to the two speakers, and some of those questions will be answered in the course of the talk. And the second is that the chat box is open and it will remain open. Please put in your questions till the end of the talks. Then Dr. Amrita Shekhar will start the Q&A. And for the Q&A, Dr. Nitya Wadhwa, who is a clinical trialist and heads CDSA, will join. And she has a wealth of knowledge and experience of recruiting and speaking to patients and asking them to join clinical trials here in India. With that, I'll hand over to Mr. Avinash Kumar. Avinash, over to you.
Thanks, Dr. Usha. Hi, everyone. My name is Avinash. I'm a co-founder of an innovation consultancy called Quicksand. And while I share my screen, I can start giving you a quick introduction. Maybe, can you see my screen?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Cool. So today I wanted to share a bit of our work in working broadly in the domain of enabling informed consent within clinical trials using what we call transmedia, and I'll just explain really quickly what that means as well. So just a really quick introduction to what transmedia is. Very simply put, as the word suggests, it's the use of multiple media platforms to tell a story. And what differentiates transmedia is that it really encompasses many strategies, traverses several industries. And also what's interesting, and I guess in this kind of a context, is also that it's the roots of transmedia are in entertainment, storytelling, fiction, and so on and so forth. And why it's important is because it's determining in a way how future people in the near future in India, around the world, will be consuming content. And two big features of what's coming, so to speak, for people, all of us, our participants in clinical trials, the stakeholders, all of them will, in a way, experience content in the near future, and even already do so today, where a story or an idea is often communicated through very different mediums altogether. And they're also disseminated through various different platforms. And as you know, some of you who might be working in clinical trials or in public engagement in general might have already discussed, let's say, the role of TikTok, the role of WhatsApp, the role of social media, and so on. So all of these trends, in a way, are pointing to an atmosphere where everybody, including us, like I said, will consume media in a fragmented manner. And so the question is, why should we apply then transmedia storytelling to clinical trial engagement, right? So there are three kind of top level ideas. One, obviously, is that people, like I said, our lives are rapidly changing, even more so today. Media is transforming exponentially, like I just mentioned as well. And finally, clinical trials themselves are changing. As some of you will be aware, there is, just during COVID, there's been a huge transformation of processes, ideas, guidelines, which are ongoing right now. A lot of change is happening in being able to continue or start new trials in this period. And what's coming up in the future, obviously, with the advent of AI and other forms of tech disruption, one will also see the need for engaging or housing different forms of media inside clinical trials. So these are kind of three kind of simple ideas through which one could think about why this kind of an approach might be useful. What I've prepared for the talk are three very short case studies that can help illuminate a little bit of our own work, as well as the kind of topic that I just discussed. So the first one is a project we concluded a couple of years back with the Wellcome Trust. It was a year-long project broadly on the topic of people-centered clinical trials. And for this project, we engaged with stakeholders, people, scientists, and also institutions in India, Southern Africa, as well as Brazil. And the idea was to look at clinical trials during epidemics. And what you see on the slide right now, in fact, some pictures are from THSTI, who were a collaborator for us, are scenes from user testing that was happening in this project. So what we did in this project, in a nutshell, was we tried to create several new ideas for engaging with people during epidemics, during clinical trials, during epidemics. And the tools that we developed were pushed through a process of co-creation, as you can see, where we went around these countries, meeting people and making our ideas sharper. I wanted to share one of the outcomes that that we kind of made, which is a simple clinical trial comic. And it's only about 20 pages long, so I'll just maybe stay on each page for like 4 or 5 seconds so you can read it. Again, this is obviously in English, but this was translated in 3 languages for the research. And if we hit the ground with it, then it'll be translated in local languages as well. So here again, the idea is to introduce in a very simple way what a clinical trial is. Now, obviously, for a lot of people who work in the sector, informed consent is understood well, but a lot of the research that one does into this sector, you also understand that even a lot of the traditional methods of informed consent don't often result in actual consent, or I wouldn't say actual consent, but they don't result in a comprehensive understanding of what people are stepping into and also knowledge of the science itself. So this particular comic was made to help people understand what clinical trials are, break down the science behind various aspects of clinical trials, including like randomization and so on, as well as try to help people understand the context within which the everyday context or the the daily experience of what happens when you go for a clinical trial, and also to take away some of the fear and misconceptions out of it, also to introduce certain aspects like adverse events, and also to finally explain to people in some ways how science works and what the benefits of science are in a way, what the benefits of research participation are, and so on. So this is kind of, again, happy to share this. This is actually something we're working on as a microsite right now, trying to make this information public, because we also realize that during COVID, there's obviously so many trials going on, and possibly a resource like this could help researchers in India and South Asia as well. So I'll stop here in the interest of time, but hopefully that's kind of a good glimpse into something we made. Now, what I wanted to explain earlier also was when we made this comic, we also then, for example, pushed the comic through several stages of like people looking at it in different countries, giving us feedback, and trying to create something that is an iterative, creative product, so to speak. The second case study that I prepared was from an ongoing project called Suraksha. This is largely on the topic of breast cancer research, and it's essentially a project that's looking to address the need for South Asia specific data, essentially, and risk assessment, because there's a big white space in the risk prediction models around cancer, specifically breast cancer. And the idea here was to essentially do something much before the trial actually happens to help essentially create a foundation for decisions that one might make during the actual trial and the engagement. So in this case, what we did was, for example, one of the key ideas here was to understand the level of awareness that Indian women might have towards breast cancer. And around that, we also, in this slide, what you see is a small nuance of that, which is trying to understand what kind of infographics would women in India understand around this topic. We also looked at certain aspects of, for example, this slide is showing various types of illustrations and this was then put into user research to understand what kind of appeals to them more, less, what makes more sense, and so on. And that was also a way to have more qualitative research-based conversations around awareness, around stigma, and so on. And finally, what this led to were 2 things right now, which is obviously these are just prototypes and they're in the field being researched as we speak. So they're not final ones in any case. And we made a comic that again helps you understand what a person might go through when they need to go through genetic testing, and addressing anxiety, helping people understand again the science behind it in a simple manner, and also to answer just everyday questions that a lot of people have that have also come up in our research when we did so. We also made an animation which answers kind of similar issues, but also goes deeper into the science of genes themselves and so on. So these are some frames from the comic as it's laid out. Again, this is being tested in the field with people. Once we get feedback, we might change the entire comic. We might change the way it looks. We might change the way it reads. But again, a big part of process, which I think everyone should understand who does work like this, is that even though it might appear as making comics or graphic design and so on, the actual work that goes on behind the scenes is far more in many ways, and also far more crucial than the actual representation at times.
What are genes?
I'm going to play a small animation.
Body is like a building, and cells are the bricks. These cells contain chromosomes. Chromosomes are thread-like structures made up of DNA. A long set of DNA is called a gene. Genes contain the blueprint of all our hereditary information. We inherit 2 sets of genes, one from each of our parents. Each gene corresponds to a unique set of instructions, responsible for controlling body functions and determining the features and characteristics.
So I'm just going to skip through it. Apologies, but again,
The
this should be out
instructions in a
sometime this week.
gene are like codes G, C, T, put women at a higher risk of getting ovarian cancer from each parent. This also means that the child has a 50% chance of inheriting the parent's normal gene. It can be prevented or picked up early if we know that a person is at an increased risk. It is also important to remember that the probability of developing cancer is not the same as the probability of dying from cancer.
So this gives you, again, these are being translated into local languages as well in both written and spoken. So that gives you an idea of how one could essentially work for a clinical trial without necessarily, it's almost like you can use transmedia to help you, and also the research that goes behind transmedia to help you prepare for a trial, and essentially the pre-production work of a clinical trial is what I just shared with you. Case study 3, again, in the interest of time, sorry, just going by a little bit fast, is a project called Pod Adventures, which is an ongoing clinical trial for a video game which teaches problem solving as an enabler for better mental health. And this is done in, we're working with Dr. Vikram Patel at Sangat, and it's also a well-funded project. So just a quick overview of the project. So POD stands for Problems, Options, and Do It. It's essentially a psychosocial intervention under the broad umbrella of CBT. And our idea here is to create 4 or 5 and more right now in the testing, at least 4 to 5 different vignettes of school-going kids in India. And by interacting with them and going to school with them and going home with them and interacting with their parents, you understand their life events, and you also learn several problem-solving tools that can help you essentially tackle your own mental health. So the actual clinical trial here is of a video game. And again, just to give you a quick sense of the participatory process, the entire game itself, as well as the communication, has been developed with adolescents in Goa and Delhi, or NCR. And what you see here are glimpses from 2 co-creation workshops that happened. And again, part of this is to, again, in the context of video games, obviously testing means testing the actual product. But also what I'm going to share with you is actually the film, the animation film we made for enabling better informed consent for this game. So what I'm going to show you, the video, is actually a part of the game itself in some ways. It's introduced in class before recruitment. It's also part of the actual product. And we've tried our best to make it kind of friendly to the target group. So again, it's a 6-minute film, which again, I mean, just the duration of a film like this says a lot about the challenges that all of us have, right? To communicate science, to communicate clinical trials in a way that it makes sense to adolescents might still take 6 minutes of simple storytelling. So the argument is obviously that 6 minutes is too long for any young person to consume. They only, they break apart at 15 seconds nowadays. So, but again, I think that's a part of the continuing challenges of how do you actually blend all of these worlds together. So I'm just going to scroll through this a little bit again and then skip to the next story.
नमस्ते, हम आपको शोध अध्ययन या रिसर्च स्टडी में भाग लेने के लिए आमंत्रित करना चाहते हैं। ये वीडियो आपको ये बताएगा कि आप क्या उम्मीद कर सकते हैं। फिर आप ये तय कर सकते हैं कि आपको हिस्सा लेना है या नहीं। निर्णय आपका रहेगा। आप सोच रहे होंगे, शोध अध्ययन क्या होता है? शोध अध्ययन में ऐसी जानकारी इकट्ठा करते हैं जिसका उपयोग प्रश्नों के उत्तर देने के लिए किया जा सकता है कि कुछ कैसे काम करता है। हम तनावपूर्ण समस्याओं का सामना करने वाले छात्रों की मदद करने के लिए नए तरीके के बारे में जानकारी इकट्ठा करना चाहते। ये छात्र की मदद करता है या समाधान देगा। ये कार्यक्रम छात्रों को समस्या समाधान है जो आपको ये समझाएंगे कि तनावपूर्ण समस्या से बेहतर निपटने के लिए समस्या समाधान का उपयोग कैसे कर सकते हैं। ये पूरी तरह से यादृच्छिक और कंप्यूटर का फैसला है। इसके बाद यदि आप पहले समूह में हैं, तो आप सीधा कार्यक्रम शुरू करेंगे। यदि आप दूसरे समूह में हैं, तो आप अपनी समस्याओं पर अपने तरीके से काम कर सकते हैं। अध्ययन के अंत कि आपके द्वारा दी गई सभी जानकारी आपके और हमारी टीम के बीच निजी और गोपनीय रखी जाएगी। यदि हम रिपोर्ट लिखते हैं या शोध के बारे में बात करते हैं, तो आपका नाम या किसी भी व्यक्तिगत जानकारी का इस्तेमाल नहीं किया जाएगा। हम केवल इसके बारे में बात करेंगे कि हमने परिणामों से क्या सीखा। यदि हमें लगा आपकी सुरक्षा खतरे में है, तो ही आपकी जानकारी केवल आपके परिवार या अन्य पेशेवरों के साथ साझा की जाएगी। यदि आप हिस्सा लेना चाहते हैं तो ये पूरी और फिर किसी भी समय इस अध्ययन
Sorry for the bumpy ride through that. But again, as you can see, it covers several topics across that entire, in a way, the value stream of a clinical trial. And again, this has actually proved very useful. In fact, this video itself has helped in the comprehension of the actual trial inside schools, as well as for teachers and other stakeholders. So there are obviously other benefits of making media like that. It's not only about recruitment, right? It's also about, in general, science and society discourse, which I'll just speak about in the end, but just about better communication and creating assets that can actually help inform not just trial participants, but the entire ecosystem and public at large can also be impacted by good communication design in this medium. Because at the end of the day, if it's cancer or it's mental health, there are certain messages and certain ideas that will be beneficial to society at large, irrespective of whether they're part of clinical trials or not. And that is an interesting outcome of working in this kind of a transmedia fragmented manner. And finally, in this project, I also want to quickly share a couple of experiments we've done in mental health and around using games. And on the left is a scene from a prototype we were building around using virtual reality as a way to help understand and create empathy around mental health in Indian schools. And again, connecting that to a larger kind of program, which could be going into a clinical trial around school textbook education and so on. And on the right, we're looking at, similarly looking at the role for augmented reality. And here you can see that there's a phone that's pointed at a comic in the background. And on the phone are some augmented reality layers so that the comic can be communicated in a more interesting manner, maybe with kind of more secret conversations and so on and so forth. And finally, just a couple of points right towards the end. One was this whole, for a lot of people, like Usha was mentioning, actually public kind of engagement is actually more than just making flyers, etc. For example, it is a lot about reinventing engagement, right? And if the time that we're going through today, all of this year, the next year, and the years to come after that are altered, obviously, for obvious reasons, then one should also think through how we can reinvent certain aspects of clinical trial engagement and how we can reinvent that on the back of the changes that are happening in media, in technology, in society at large. So I definitely feel like it's the right time to kind of think through. And also very clear and simple example here, which many of you might be going through, is obviously, for example, when you look at clinical trials that were ongoing before COVID and now have had to alter course and try to deliver their trials as much digitally as possible. So it already opens up a very different kind of space where the need for different kinds of media, the need for different kind of engagement inside clinical trial already is being forced upon clinical trials. And these are kind of opportunities where good practices around research, good practices around co-creation and design, and of course, great practices around communication design and storytelling can really impact the sector in the years to come. And my last slide, just a few principles. I think there were a couple of questions around challenges of transmedia production as well as how to get there. I think I just had 3 simple points. One was to remember that clinical trial participants and stakeholders are eventually, in one way, only audiences for media. So it's our responsibility to create good media. And to think of them as audience means that you think about their engagement, how they view things, how they listen to things, how they're impacted by things. You try to go back to them and understand what impact it had on them and so on. So I think that's an important switch in the head as far as content creation is concerned, to think of participants as actually audiences and respect them in the same manner. The second part is just around like what I mentioned before, which is that clinical trials are part of science, and the larger, let's say, lack of understanding or miscommunications around clinical trials eventually are a failure of the larger science and society discourse that we have. I wouldn't like to say a country, but it actually exists around the world, as we can see in examples even in America today. So at some level, if we keep a track on that, then I feel like one can bring a very different perspective to the creation of media. And this again is where storytelling has an advantage, because storytelling often tries to take a look at this core idea that we're trying to communicate science to everyday people. Let's look at that as the challenge and not get embroiled in the actual nuances and complexities sometimes that trials bring. And finally, obviously, clinical trials are some of the most complex scientific endeavors that man has embarked upon, and especially in modern times. And we must acknowledge that it is at the heart of it extremely complex information design, whether it's breaking down an entire trial into a small comic or any of these activities. It's all complex information design work. And therefore, if people who try to embark on creating transmedia content for clinical trials, they must remember this and therefore treat it with that respect and treat it with the tools that you have at hand to deal with complexities in work like this. So I'll stop there. Thanks a lot for having me here. It's always for us a really, it's exciting to be here just because a lot of practices such who work in the creative sector such as us, it is actually rare to be at forums like this, and it's even rarer to be able to be in doing work like this and working with brilliant minds who work in clinical trials and in science in general. So thanks for having me. That's my presentation.
Thank you, Avinash. I'm sure there are going to be lots of questions and also a lot of excitement in the trials community and more engagement. But we won't take the questions now. We will take them at the end. So I will ask Dr. Rajesh Jain to tell us about e-consent, which is the other topical issue.
Thank you, Dr. Usha. Good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, thanks, Avinash, for setting the context, right? You did make some very important points of trials are changing, digital has kind of enveloped around all around us because of the pandemic, and it's time to reinvent and rethink, right? So with that, before I go into that, really just set a context of why are we talking digital as a larger topic, and then get into the specific of e-consent. Now, trials are changing because the healthcare is changing, and if healthcare is changing, life sciences industry is forced to have a change. And there are key themes that are driving the entire healthcare industry with respect to how they manage patients. There is a theme around patient centricity, there is a theme around personalization, and there is a theme around collaboration. And when you think about collaboration in the clinical trial world, we all know how many different participants and stakeholders are involved in conducting a trial. It's not just the sponsors, not just the investigators, not just the coordinators. They are the labs, they are the regulatory agencies, they are the ethics committee bodies, and there are multiple data management people, and there are multiple people who are involved in a clinical trial conduct. And the demand is that we have an increased collaboration between all of these participants in a clinical trial. And none of this can be achieved without the right technology platform. And obviously, the bottom line of every and any initiative is, can we run better at a lower cost? Um, these themes have been in discussion not now, they have been in discussions for the last many years. In fact, the picture on the left that I present was presented by the former vice chairman of Novartis at an health congress in way back in 2017. So healthcare changes which are going to affect clinical trials have been there in conversations, have been there in the recognition. It's just that I think the pandemic just forced all of us to adopt it. And now that it has been adopted, I do personally believe, as with Avinash, that it's going to remain with us. And now, when we talk about patient centricity in a clinical trial setting, the very first step where we interact with the patient is the consenting process. And therefore, e-consent is the very first such digital interface that presents the opportunity for us to better engage with the patient. Now, what is an e-consent? Simply put, it's not about converting a paper document into a digital device or a mobile device. It's not that. It needs what Avinash is doing in terms of transmedia technologies and transmedia outputs to be incorporated into a platform where we are able to convert all of that information in those 10, 20, 30 pages that we present in an informed consent form or a document to the prospective patient, which means that e-consent is a complete digital technology that allows you to manage all of the information that you want to share with a particular prospective subject and leverage transmedia like of technologies, which would mean text, graphics, audios, videos, podcasts, chats, etc., etc., to make the participant a more engaged patient, and also make sure that he understands the information that you're presenting to him much more comprehensively, and he or she ends up taking an informed decision of participation or rejecting in a trial. Dr. Usha did mention at the beginning of the talk that we present a lot of different tons of information in informed consent. Not every time everybody goes through it very carefully. Not both sides of the story. The sites probably don't spend enough of time, or patients don't spend enough of time reading that information, comprehending that information, or absorbing that information. Thereby, what an e-consent digital technology does, it empowers the patient to make informed decisions. And as we all can imagine, that if I have taken a very well informed decision, my chances of completing the trial are much, much higher as compared to somebody who's kind of taken a decision today, and then tomorrow he realizes, oh, what have I got into, and then says, hey, I want to drop out. So that's the first biggest advantage of the use of an e-consent technology. Of course, as we have seen in the pandemic, digital technologies dissolves the boundaries of uh, 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 between what exists between people, and makes remote availability of any kind of things to happen. And that's what remote e-consent technology exactly does, is provides a ability for us to conduct the consent process in a remote fashion. Of course, as you have already seen, when you adapt any kind of multimedia or transmedia technologies, it helps you to adapt them to the learning styles of that particular geography, that community, that country, whatever, wherever you are going to conduct the consent. So that's the biggest advantage of a e-consent technology. So, what are the typical features of a e-consent technologies? Number one, of course, it has to present itself as a technology friendly system, which means I should be able to conduct this platform should be web friendly, which I can do it on my desktop or laptops. It should be iPad friendly, or it should be mobile friendly. That's the first thing. And why do we need that? Because today's world, um, we have different preferences to what kind of technology, or even access to what kind of technology platforms we have. You and I will have an access to a laptop, but there are certain people who probably just have a mobile phone, a smartphone that they can use, and not necessarily have a laptop with them. And then there are, of course, those classes of people who prefer an iPad versus a laptop. So it has to be a technology that is rendering itself user friendly from a device perspective. Secondly, it has to be ability to have the complete workflow management of mimicking what you do today. What you do in the today's consenting process is exactly what the e-consent technology is going to mimic. There are no changes in the process. Then it has to have the ability to have different type of features, as I already mentioned, things like ability to chat and or do a video conversation with the patient, ability to exchange SMS messages, ability for putting dictionary in place, so that when I'm reading an informed consent, and if I have some word or some term that I don't understand, I should be able to quickly look up the dictionary and understand what is it that I am going into. Then it has all the transmedia perfect things that Avinash spoke about: pictures, graphics, videos, comics, and all those kind of things. And more importantly, given the kind of research and given the kind of guidelines and regulations that are coming up, the ability for tiered consenting. Now, tiered consenting by itself is a very different topic, but very quickly, tiered consenting means the ability for a patient to confirm which part of the trial does he really want to participate in versus which does he not. Say, for example, you're doing a trial where there is genetic analysis, a genetic biomarker analysis for which you require to store some biotissue samples for like 15 years. The patient can conveniently say, yes, I participate into this drug trial, but I don't want my tissues to be stored for any future genetic analysis. Now that's tiered consenting. And obviously, any and every of these digital technologies allow you to mimic the signature process, makes it more digitally, and of course allows you the flexibility to have a paper and ink signature process as well. Now, once you use digital platforms, your ability to collect data gets that much more robust, and therefore it allows you to run different types of analytics and dashboarding views, which I'm sure any CRA in this audience will appreciate. That I would really love to know what's happening at my sites with respect to the consenting process. How many are in consenting? How many are refusing consenting? How many patients have consented, and when did they consent? And and because these technologies bring the world closer, you as a CRA are now able to conduct a complete remote review of the entire consenting process and the consenting document without having to visit the sites. Yes, I know you will have questions around confidentiality, etc., etc. Just hold on to that, and I'll come to that in a minute. And these are some screenshots of a platform like a digital of an e-consent platform. Remember, any and every digital platform does have a user authentication process, including your Amazon Primes and Netflixes of the world. They first authenticate you as a registered user before you're allowed access to their platforms and the information within that. Similarly, does an e-consent platform. You first authenticate the user, present him with the information for the trial that you're consenting him for, and use other platform. And here's a screenshot where somebody double clicked on the word efficacy, and here's the dictionary that pops up explaining what efficacy does. So you may not necessarily have videos or graphics or comics to explain everything about a consent. You can very well use a dictionary. You can very well use some chat mechanisms where the patient, while they are going through the consent form, want to raise a question to the investigator and or the site team, they can do so immediately and expect a response back from the site. Now, this is very, very helpful in a pandemic like situation where we need to do remote consenting. Then there are obviously videos that you can embed within the entire consent form to explain a certain aspect a little more better, and add more additional information, and so on and so forth, and collect some mandatory questions if you have within the questions. So at every part, and this is now a regulatory requirement, that when you are giving a consent and you're using a digital technology, let's just make sure that the patient has understood what's being presented to him, and knowledge review assessments is the best way to do that. Just present some questions, probably objective questions, where they say yes, no, whatever, and make sure that the patients have comprehended the consent information and are thereby making an informed consent. Now, imagine this against all the previous many years back issues that people have raised about, are people being communicated with the right level of information, and are they making the right informed consent? All this is there in the digital platform. I don't think anybody can raise a question that the consenting process was deficient. And last but at the end of it, the patient has the ability to sign that consent form digitally and or a paper process. So if e-consent is so great, what's happening about its adoption? And these are certain survey reports that came out from the surveys conducted in 2019 and 2020. On the left is a survey that was conducted by Tufts University, and you realize that amongst all the technology, e-consent after telemedicine is the highest, has the highest adoption rates. Of course, pandemic again has kind of enforced everybody to go faster on that adoption. And on the right is the survey that was conducted by the Transcelerate Biopharma. This is a conglomerate of about 30 different global pharma organizations. And you see that all the geographies that are colored in blue are the ones where e-consent technology has been adopted and has been used in a clinical trial, including that of India. So India is also in part of that. So what are the factors influencing consent adoption? And I'll be quick on this just to keep in conscious of time. Uh, Subject protection, because it's truly assuring the entire consent process. And again, it's the ability to do timeliness of the consent, and especially the reconsent administration, that makes it a lot more effective tool. Data integrity is very highly assured. All of us have known about the problems with consenting process. Even today, from US FDA inspections, there are 17% findings of all inspections which are related to consent. They could be wrong versions, wrong signatures, people not having done the right consent versions. They may have not done the consent process before the study procedures were initiated, and so on and so forth. And e-consent platform kind of overcomes all of them. As I said, the analytics and dashboards allow remote monitoring to be possible, which obviously brings in speed, efficiency, and cost savings. Compliance is obviously much higher because now all the processes are system controlled and people don't have the flexibility of bypassing those processes to their convenience. Patient comprehension is much better, and in many surveys, it has been said that 67% of all patients who were presented the option of e-consent versus paper actually preferred the e-consent technology because they understood the information a lot more better than the paper process. It reduces the site burden. For one very obvious reason, paper and its management takes up a lot of space, time, and efforts. Photocopying, storing, archiving, and all of that, all those kind of headaches are taken away. Obviously, in a pandemic-like situation and thereafter as well, when you can't visit the sites, what do you do with the trials? I mean, either you stop them, which is not the most effective way, or you get into a remote or a virtual trial methodology where e-consent makes it absolutely possible. It's interactive. And in a CRO's survey that was conducted, 97% CROs commented that there was a positive impact on engaging with the patients through the e-consent technology. And obviously, when patients are better engaged and they take informed consent better, patient retention is much, much better. There's a 42% higher incidences of patients completing the trial as compared to the 50% dropout rates that we see even today. If you put all of this into some sort of a quantitative metrics in one particular study, of course, it's very difficult to quantify this, but in some methodologies, what we have seen is there's at least about a $300,000 reduction or a cost saving because of the e-consent process. And the last slide on my side is okay, yes, it's all good, but is it easy? Is it, why don't we all adopt it? Because yes, some questions are there. Questions around literacy rates. Guys, all of us have adopted smartphones, right? I mean, even the servants who visit our homes, their children are actually going on the smartphones for the online schools and tuitions and everything. Smartphone adoption is the highest as far as any geography is concerned. And I have particular access to such information and trials where I've been associated, where even the elderly population was very, very comfortable with using smart technologies for such kind of purposes. Of course, illiteracy would mean that they are unable to read or write. But what do you use this technology for? Of course, you use it for better comprehension by the patient. And as I said, each and every e-consent technology mimics the current world, which means that if my patient is illiterate, I have the ability to bring the LAR or the impartial witness onto that particular platform, and they will complete the consenting process as per the current guidelines. And all of this are there in the audit trail that is available in the system. As I was already speaking about tech savviness, everybody is very tech savvy according to me. So just a simple smartphone access is good enough for us to have an e-consent technology. If the patient doesn't really have that, why not the sites make that infrastructure available and they can still reap the benefits of an e-consent technology without having to compromise on the benefits that you can see otherwise. Confidentiality is all very well maintained, guys. It's a technology platform which has to firstly meet all the compliance requirements of 21 CFR Part 11, Annex 50, HIPAA, and so on and so forth. So confidentiality of the patient is well assured. If you think that because you log in through the Amazon Prime on your smartphone, your data is available to everyone, it's not really so, because all of these technologies have high level of encryption, and in a life sciences kind of a world, the focus on encryption and data security is that much higher. And we obviously have to fulfill the requirements as are laid down by the guidelines. And more importantly, although you are a CRA who has access to the platform and has access to remote monitoring capabilities, be rest assured that you won't be able to identify the patient, because we apply all the necessary principles as per HIPAA to make the data visibility role based. Is it cost effective? As I've already said, there's no way to absolutely quantify a paper consenting process versus digital. But when you put in all the related factors of the non-compliances associated with the paper processes, all the headaches around paper management processes, I think e-consent is a much more cost-effective platform. I am, as Dr. Usha said, we'll take up all the questions at the end now. So thank you so much, and thank you seriously, Dr. Usha, Nitya, everyone, for having me here with amongst you all to share my views.
Thank you, Dr. Jain. And I'll now hand over to Amrita, who will take a few questions because I think we have about 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I'm the person who's made things off because I think I found some of my slides were without audio in the beginning. So, Amrita, over to you.
Sure. So again, thanks everyone for being a part of today's webinar. And I thought we can first ask the questions that have been raised by the audience, both during the live session as well as during registration, to Avinash, since his was the first talk. So Avinash, one question is that people want to know how that it has been discussed a bit, but have you got specifically any feedback on how technology has enhanced participant experience and outcomes from the work that you have done?
If I got we definitely have been getting feedback on that, especially during the last 6 months, not just for the clinical trial related work that we're doing, but also as researchers who work often in the field, working with people, exchanging communication and ideas and designs with them. That whole process has been shifted a lot in recent 6-7 months, purely obviously with the move to with the attempt to move to digital platforms smoothly. And in the context of clinical trials themselves, I think definitely, the work that we did, which I was sharing with the Wellcome Trust year and a half back, while the world in which that was happening is still the paper-led world of, let's say, the older clinical trial world in a way. The actual people that we met, their lifestyle, their questions, their suggestions on top of the content were obviously more attuned with modern technology lifestyles, right? Regardless of their economic, socioeconomic background and so on, there is certain access and experience of technology uh, which you can't deny, no matter what kind of research you do and no matter what, who you meet today. And specifically, I think some of the stuff that was interesting, at least from the point of view of what we did earlier, was definitely this discussion, which I think Dr. Jain also mentioned, was around the role of AI, for example, in clinical trials, and how do you explain to a user who's living in, say, Chhattisgarh, that his data might be used in a machine learning or an AI based system, and health data that is, let's say, got for cancer research might impact health outcomes and research for TB in the future for somebody else in Sri Lanka, right? So how do you kind of connect all those dots together? And so I think in some ways, because technology is creeping into people's lives, their expectations from even research we do or questions we ask, often these kind of additional nuanced questions come up, which is anyway very exciting and challenging. Uh, for us.
Okay, thank you. The second question is that designing innovative content like transmedia tools are all very exciting to use, but many people don't have design experience. So, are there any special? I know you've touched on the principles of design, but what are the skills, and is there a way to acquire these skills? Is there somewhere one can start? Are there resources available?
That's a great question. Even my studio has been trying to answer for many years now. I think so. I think there are 2 points to answer, facets to the answer. One is just around understanding the design discipline and practice and discourse in India at this point in time. So, suffice to say that we have a very short history of modern design, let's say, so to speak, obviously, but at the same time, we have a amazing and ancient history of making and creativity and expression. But in the context of the kind of work we're doing right now, there's unfortunately a very small pool of talent, I think, in the country that A is willing they would be, but in terms of just being able to have the education, so to speak, to go deeper into these kind of what these get taught that in schools, for example. right? And the other aspect is that often people from the creative practice don't know how to connect with the health sector, so to speak, or with organizations like what we're talking about and context like what we're talking about. So I think if you were someone who was from the clinical trial enterprise, so to speak, and you wanted to make or access better communication or better engagement work in your work, then I think the place to start would be to try to find small agencies around the country, which there are now a lot, communication design agencies, and reach out to them and try to find agencies where they combine research and communication design. Again, that's one of the white spaces for design in the country. That's the second point I wanted to get at, that often research for communicate, like research for making a comic is not a very common thing to do, right? Or research for making an animation film. And so just that combining those two, like the domains of art and research together is a complicated affair. And so I think people should, I think the start should be with trying to combine those worlds. And in terms of the more tactical skills, like you said, around making things, I think India has a lot of talent. I think the more important question is, in your head, if you're planning out your trial, are you able to connect the dots between understanding that you might have to bring art and research together, that you might have to work with limited talent, or you might have to make your own team of a freelancer illustrator from somewhere, mixed with a graphic design studio somewhere, mixed with a language services company in Bombay who will convert into 3 languages. I mean, so all of that stuff is a bit of a, uh, like the Indian Dhaba style way of figuring out how you're going to do extremely complex work and make it work in the country, and that's the truth. And for me, that's a very enjoyable truth. I mean, I love the way of this way of working in India and connecting the dots, so to speak. So I think, yeah, connecting the dots is an important aspect of making it happen.
The fundamental is of Jugaad.
Thank
We
you.
can't escape it right now.
Okay, so the next set of questions is for Dr. Rajesh. And, one of the questions that people have been asking is how do you validate data integrity in digital processes? So, in general, I mean, of course, consent and specific, but
So, see, any technology that collects data, it comes with a time stamping platform. That's point number one, where every data and the user who's inputting the data to that particular device or system, right from his user authentication to the validity of that data field, is authenticated by the system with a date and timestamp. Now, when you put all these three factors together, what you get is an authenticated data, that it's the right user who's inputted this data, it's put the right data in the right field, and then on the date and the time that he's put this in. Now, on top of it, yes, you can apply all the data management principles of edit checks and validations of the data, that yes, is this data as per the expected kind of a thing, right? So, for example, if somebody is trying to input temperature through a mobile app, you can have restrictions that hey, it's got to be a 3-digit dot something, and nobody else will be able to tamper with that. I mean, nobody can put a 4-digit number to that. So there are ways and means of designing at a user interface level which will make sure that the data is accurate to the extent that you trust the user to put the right data. Second is then apply all the principles of user identity, date time stamping, and the encryption, so that you are authenticating the data at its source, and when you're encrypting the data, nobody is able to tamper with that data while it is in transit from the device to wherever your database system is.
okay. The next question, which I think is probably related to the data privacy and ongoing debate in India, where is the data stored? Like,
So every data, every system, every app comes with a database of its own, right? So when you do a e-consent technology, you do need to have a database behind it. Yes, what the technology organizations do is create those databases for use on which the CDSA e-consent platform is put. And therefore, all the trials of CDSA, all the patients of CDSAs and their data will only be in that specific CDSA specific database. So and then nobody else has an access. So it's not like it's a free flowing world.
right. The other
And
question, maybe,
yeah,
sorry, Usha, please.
and Amrita, if I could just add to that, and of course now all the data is hosted in the cloud, and the cloud is in India. So it may be Microsoft Azure or some other platform where you're storing the data, but the servers are physically in India. And that is one of the questions people ask, is the data going out of the country? Increasingly, all the countries will host the data in their own, so that, holds for all these platforms.
Great, thank you. And then, Rajesh, one last question for you is that if telephonic consent is being taken, so there's not really e-consent, but like using a telephonic method, can it be built into an e-consent platform, like maybe IVRS or something? And if it is, then how should it be documented?
So it's a good question, especially in today's world, right? So yes, see, all the e-consent platforms, they come with a built-in, and practically many of them, I should say that the many ones that I have evaluated, or even the one that I was associated in development with, there is a built-in chat, telephonic capability, and or a video capability. Now, if you don't have a video, of course, you can do a telephone chat. What regulations require you to do is, of course, record all of this information and store it along with that patient's credentials to that. The responsibility then lies upon the investigator and or whoever is administering the consent to record all of this in terms of documentation, that this was a telephonic call, these are the kind of questions and answers that was discussed and the information shared and so on and so forth. And now there is an audio recording at the back of it for anybody to go and re-verify the whole process as such it is done. So because the recordings will come with a date timestamp, you're not very concerned. I mean, you wouldn't have an issue about the date as such. I mean, there is a date audit trail behind it to establish the day, the date, and the time at which this conversation and telephonic chat was being done. But it needs to run through the system. It cannot be that I'm doing my regular phone-to-phone call and then expecting the e-consent technology to be able to give some data behind it. That doesn't. You'll have to have a telephonic call capability from within the e-consent platform itself.
Right. Okay, thank you. The next question is for Dr. Nitya. So you have a lot of you have a lot of practical experience in engaging with multiple trial sites and trial participants. And so according to you, these digital tools, do you think they can easily be deployed in India? As in, how ready are the current sites and participants for uptake of these tools?
So, how ready are they? So, like, there are challenges. India is a big country, so it depends on the population where you're applying the tools, really. And there are some challenges, as Rajesh mentioned. There are challenges of use of technology, but with the pandemic, actually, people have started using technology more and more to just stay connected with each other. So that is there, and then there could be challenges of literacy, but then there are ways of overcoming that also, using different kind of transmedia tools to kind of also make the participant understand the whole process. So yeah, there are challenges, but they're not challenges that cannot be overcome.
Right. And then the other question, I think this has already been answered by everyone, but because this was raised, is that it doesn't matter what that digital platform is. Does that platform need to be externally validated by some agency in India before it can be used in a trial, or that's not mandatory?
No,
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 it's not mandatory.
no,
As long as the platform is validated, it's good enough.
yes.
Okay, thank you. And in the interest of time, so just one quick last question to Professor Menon. We've discussed a lot on PPI, but can you elaborate on what you think are the most important aspects of PPI and why it really adds a lot of meaning? And it should, in fact, be a part of research. We shouldn't be debating it anymore.
Yeah, so I'd like to just start with, we should be there right in the beginning when we're designing, because quite often the patients will also contribute to what might be the right questions. There may be some secondary outcomes which are very important to them. So right from design onwards, and now, we have many patient-related outcomes as a outcome of the trial. So right from design, and then like Avinash said, when we do the consent, the patient information leaflet or whatever it is, those transmedia tools, we need their input as to how best to design it. During the trial, really, it's really helpful because if you have patient members, so we have on our trial management committee, participants on our trial management committee, then they can, even with adverse events, when things go wrong, they are very good advocates if you have done the trial properly, and some things might go wrong, and they are really good in standing beside the clinicians and the other stakeholders to explain more to the general public, and they're really better at it. And finally, the place where they do a lot of good work is if you want to make a policy change. So, we might have a trial that comes out positive, especially academic trials where it's not a drug or something. It may be some intervention. It may be that mental health intervention that Avinash is now helping in that trial. And for us, the patient bodies, they really push the politicians to make that, to get it adopted. So really, if you engage with them in a good manner throughout, so many of our patients have organized into bodies. So once you get a drug or anything, then they will go to parliament, they will go to their politician, they will lobby for getting that trial finding moved into guidance and policy. So throughout, I think they bring a different aspect, and we're doing this for them. So if we're doing it for them, then how can they not be involved? So I think, and it's wonderful that it's in India, really in the community trials, right from the beginning, it was being involved. There was a lot of work in the community before the trial was being brought to the community. And I think it's just in the hospital setup, we've been doing less of it. And it's wonderful that now all of it is coming together.
Okay, so with that, I'd just like to thank everyone today, and thank all our speakers, and thank Professor Menon and Dr. Nitya for joining us. And thank you all for being a very interactive audience. And we have, as usual, tried to address most of the questions that were raised either during registration or during the live session. If, however, you have any questions that you want answers to and you feel were not adequately addressed, please do feel free to write to us, and we will get back to you with the responses. Thank you so much again for your time. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.